Blood stained the hem of Tabitha Dawson's black mourning dress as she knelt beside her husband's freshly dug grave. The summer sun of 1872 beating down mercilessly on her bowed head. Knights Ferry, California had never felt so hostile, so alien to her, as it did on this cruel July day when she buried James Dawson, her partner of 7 years. "Mrs. Dawson," Reverend Phillips said softly, extending his hand to help her rise from the dusty ground of the cemetery. "It's time to leave him to rest now." Tabitha nodded numbly, allowing herself to be guided away from the grave. At 26, she had never imagined she would be a widow so young. The small mining town nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills had been her home since her wedding day, but now it felt like a prison without James by her side. "You poor dear," Mrs. Holbrook said, clasping Tabitha's gloved hands in her own. "You must come stay with us. A woman shouldn't be alone." "Thank you, but I'll manage at the farm," Tabitha replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "The farm?" Mrs. Holbrook exchanged glances with her husband. "But surely you don't intend to stay there by yourself." "It's my home," Tabitha said simply. The ride back to the farmhouse was silent save for the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. Tabitha sat rigid beside Mr. Jenkins, who had offered to drive her home. The rolling golden hills that had once seemed so full of promise now appeared barren and unforgiving. "I can stay a while if you need help," Mr. Jenkins offered as they pulled up to the modest 2-story farmhouse that James had built with his own hands. "No need," Tabitha said, descending from the wagon without assistance. "Thank you for the ride." Alone in the house that night, Tabitha didn't cry. She had done her crying in the weeks of James's illness, watching helplessly as the tuberculosis ravaged his once strong body. Now there was only emptiness and the terrifying question of what would become of her. The farm was mortgaged, the crops needed tending, and the small herd of cattle required care. James had taught her much about running the place, but there was still so much she didn't know. In the darkness of her bedroom, surrounded by his things, Tabitha made a vow to herself. She would not be driven from her home. Morning came too soon, the rooster's crow pulling Tabitha from fitful sleep. She dressed quickly in a simple work dress, abandoning the restrictive morning clothes. There would be time for propriety later. Today, there was work to be done. By noon, she had collected eggs, milked the cow, and started repairs on the chicken coop that had been damaged in the last storm. Her hands were blistered, her back ached, but the physical pain was a welcome distraction from the hollow ache in her chest. "Mrs. Dawson," a voice called, startling her. Tabitha turned to see Sheriff Morgan riding toward the house, his expression unreadable beneath his broad-brimmed hat. "Sheriff," she acknowledged, wiping her hands on her apron. "I came to check on you, madam. Town's concerned about you out here all alone. As you can see, I'm managing fine." Sheriff Morgan dismounted, tying his horse to the fence post. "Mrs. Dawson, Tabitha, you can't stay out here by yourself. It ain't proper and it ain't safe. With all due respect, Sheriff, this is my home. A woman needs protection in these parts. Your husband wouldn't want you risking yourself like this." Tabitha's jaw tightened. "My husband would want me to fight for what's ours." "There's talk in town," the sheriff continued, his voice lowering, "about you taking in boarders or selling to the Wilsons. They've been looking to expand their holdings." "I have no intention of selling or taking in strangers," Tabitha replied firmly. The sheriff sighed, replacing his hat. "Think on it, Mrs. Dawson. A woman alone invites trouble, not to mention gossip." After he left, Tabitha stood in the yard, her hands clenched into fists. Gossip and propriety, as if those mattered when her entire life had been upended. Let them talk. She had more pressing concerns than the wagging tongues of Knights Ferry. Days turned into weeks, and Tabitha fell into a grueling routine. She rose before dawn to tend to the animals, worked the fields until midday, then spent afternoons repairing equipment or preserving food for the coming winter. Each night she collapsed into bed, exhausted but determined. The town's concern quickly turned to disapproval. When Tabitha rode into Knights Ferry to sell eggs and butter, she was met with sidelong glances and hushed conversations that ceased when she approached. "Mrs. Dawson, Mrs." Holbrook said one day at the general store, her voice carrying so others could hear. "We're all worried sick about you out there. A decent woman should be under the protection of family." "I appreciate the concern," Tabitha replied evenly, selecting the supplies she needed. "But I'm managing just fine." "But the impropriety of it all," Mrs. Harrison chimed in. "A young widow living alone, working the land like a man. People are starting to talk." "Let them talk," Tabitha said, placing her purchases on the counter. "I have work to do." Behind her she heard Mrs. Harrison whisper, "So headstrong. No wonder poor James worked himself to death." Tabitha's hand stilled on her coin purse, the unfairness of the words striking her like a physical blow. She paid for her goods with shaking hands and left without another word, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully in stark contrast to the heaviness in her heart. The autumn of 1872 brought with it new challenges. The roof began to leak, and despite Tabitha's best efforts, she couldn't manage the repairs alone. The cattle needed to be moved to lower pastures before winter set in, and the final harvest required more hands than she possessed. Pride kept her from asking for help, even as the situation grew increasingly desperate. She sold 2 cows to pay the mortgage, knowing it was only a temporary solution. On a particularly difficult day in late October, Tabitha was attempting to mend the barn roof when she lost her footing. The fall wasn't far, but she landed awkwardly, pain shooting through her ankle. Gasping, she tried to stand only to collapse back to the ground. The injury wasn't severe, but it was enough to bring tears of frustration to her eyes. "Damn it all," she whispered, pounding her fist against the dirt. A sound made her look up. A rider was approaching, a tall man on a chestnut horse. Tabitha hastily wiped her eyes, attempting to rise again despite the pain. "Stay put, madam," the stranger called, dismounting with fluid grace. He approached cautiously, as if afraid of startling her. "Looks like you've had a fall." "I'm fine," Tabitha insisted, even as she winced. The stranger knelt beside her, removing his hat to reveal dark hair and startlingly blue eyes in a sun-weathered face. He wasn't young, perhaps in his mid-30s, but there was something vital and strong about him that made Tabitha suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "Isaac Blackburn," he introduced himself. "I was passing through when I saw you on that roof. Dangerous work for anyone alone." "Tabitha Dawson," she replied stiffly, "and I manage just fine." "Your ankle suggests otherwise, Mrs. Dawson," he said, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "May I take a look?" Before she could refuse, he was gently examining her ankle, his touch professional and impersonal. "Not broken, but a bad sprain. You'll need to stay off it for a few days." "I don't have a few days," Tabitha said, gesturing to the half-repaired roof. "Winter's coming." Isaac Blackburn surveyed the farm, taking in the unfinished chores and repairs with a practiced eye. "Seems to me you could use an extra pair of hands, Mrs. Dawson." "I can't pay much," Tabitha said before she could stop herself. "I'm not asking for pay," he replied, helping her to her feet. "Just a meal and maybe a place in your barn to sleep." "I'm heading to Sacramento, but I'm not in any particular hurry." Tabitha hesitated. Taking in a strange man, even just in the barn, would set the town's tongues wagging even more furiously, but the roof needed fixing and her ankle throbbed painfully. One night, she conceded finally. You can fix the roof, and I'll provide supper and a place to sleep in the barn. Isaac nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Yes, madam. Tabitha watched in grudging admiration as Isaac set to work with quiet efficiency. He helped her to the house first, insisting she elevate her ankle, then return to finish the roof repairs. By sunset, he had not only completed the roof but also chopped a week's worth of firewood and secured loose boards on the porch. When he entered the kitchen, the aroma of beef stew filled the air. Tabitha had insisted on cooking despite his protests, unwilling to be completely helpless. Smells good, Isaac said, washing up at the basin by the door. Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal. Where are you from, Mr. Blackburn? Tabitha asked as they sat at the small kitchen table. Originally Texas, but I've been moving around since the war. He ate with the appreciation of a man accustomed to much simpler fare. You cook almost as well as my mother did. The war. Tabitha couldn't help her curiosity. Which side? Union, he answered simply. Lost my brother at Gettysburg. Haven't felt much like settling down since. Tabitha nodded, understanding loss all too well. My husband died 3 months ago, tuberculosis. Isaac met her gaze steadily. I'm sorry, Mrs. Dawson. It's a hard thing, losing someone you love. Yes, she agreed, surprised by how easy it was to talk to this stranger. The town thinks I should sell the farm or find another husband immediately, as if James could be replaced so easily. Folks mean well, Isaac said diplomatically, but they forget that grief has its own timeline. After dinner, Isaac insisted on washing the dishes before heading out to the barn. Tabitha found herself reluctant to see him go, his presence having filled the empty house with something other than loneliness for the first time in months. Thank you, she said as he donned his hat to leave. For the repairs and for not telling me what I should do with my life. Isaac smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. You seem perfectly capable of making your own decisions, Mrs. Dawson. Good night. Tabitha lay awake longer than usual that night, her thoughts circling around the mysterious cowboy in her barn. There was something about Isaac Blackburn that felt trustworthy, despite his being a virtual stranger. Perhaps it was the respectful way he spoke to her, or the lack of judgment in his eyes when she mentioned her determination to keep the farm. Morning brought the realization that her ankle, while still tender, had improved enough for her to move about with the aid of a walking stick. She was preparing breakfast when Isaac appeared at the kitchen door, hat in hand. Morning, Mrs. Dawson. How's the ankle? Better, thank you, she replied, gesturing for him to enter. I've made breakfast as thanks for your help yesterday. They ate in comfortable silence, the early morning light streaming through the windows. Tabitha found herself studying Isaac when he wasn't looking, the strength in his hands, the quiet confidence in his movements, the lines of experience etched around his eyes. I should be on my way after this, Isaac said finally. Sacramento's still a fair ride. Disappointment flickered through Tabitha, surprising in its intensity. Of course, you've been more than kind already. Isaac hesitated, looking out the window at the farm. Before I go, I noticed your cattle need moving to the lower pasture. That's not a job for someone with a sprained ankle. I can manage, Tabitha said automatically. I don't doubt it, Isaac replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. But there's no harm in accepting help when it's offered freely. Tabitha considered his words. Pride had been her companion these past months, keeping her going when grief threatened to overwhelm her. But pride wouldn't fix the leak in the cellar or bring in the last of the harvest. One more day, she decided, if you're willing. Isaac's smile was answer enough. One day turned into 2, then 3. Isaac proved himself invaluable, tackling the most demanding tasks with quiet efficiency. He moved the cattle, harvested the remaining crops, and reinforced the barn for winter. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking of everything and nothing: his travels across the country, her childhood in Pennsylvania before coming west with her parents, the books they both enjoyed. On the fourth day, Tabitha rode into town for supplies, leaving Isaac to repair the broken wheel on the wagon. The usual whispers followed her through the general store, but she held her head high, ignoring the pointed looks and hushed conversations. Mrs. Dawson, Mrs. Holbrook approached as Tabitha was selecting coffee beans. "We've heard you have a man staying at your farm." Tabitha straightened, meeting the older woman's gaze directly. "Mr. Blackburn is passing through. He's been kind enough to help with some repairs in exchange for meals." "In the house?" Mrs. Holbrook pressed, her eyes wide with scandalized interest. "In the barn," Tabitha replied firmly. "Not that it's anyone's concern but my own." "My dear," Mrs. Holbrook lowered her voice conspiratorially, "everything is everyone's concern in a small town. Think of your reputation." "My reputation?" Tabitha felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I'm a widow trying to keep my farm running, not some—" "No one is suggesting anything improper," Mrs. Holbrook interrupted smoothly. "But appearances matter. A young widow, alone with a strange man, people will talk." "Let them talk," Tabitha said, her patience fraying. "I have more important things to worry about than gossip." She paid for her purchases and left, her back straight despite the weight of judgmental stares. The ride home was spent in frustrated contemplation. The townspeople would never understand her determination to remain independent. To them, a woman without a husband was a problem to be solved, a vulnerability to be addressed. Isaac was splitting wood when she returned, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the autumn chill. He paused, wiping his brow as she approached. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting her expression. Tabitha dismounted, shaking her head. "Just the usual town gossip. Apparently, I'm causing quite the scandal by allowing you to sleep in my barn." Isaac set down the axe, his expression serious. "I can move on if I'm causing you trouble." "No," Tabitha said quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I won't be dictated to by small-minded gossips. Besides, the farm is better for your help." A smile tugged at the corner of Isaac's mouth. "Stubborn woman." "So I've been told," Tabitha replied, finding herself smiling back. That evening, as they sat at the kitchen table sharing a pot of tea, Tabitha found herself studying Isaac's profile in the lamplight. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made the farmhouse feel like home again. "Tell me about your husband," Isaac said suddenly, his voice gentle. Tabitha's hand stilled around her teacup. "James, he was kind, hardworking. We met in Sacramento when my family first came west. He had dreams of owning a prosperous farm, raising a family." "You loved him," Isaac observed. "Very much," Tabitha admitted. "Though the children never came, perhaps that was a blessing given how things turned out." "And now you're fighting to keep his dream alive." Tabitha considered this. "It became my dream too, somewhere along the way. This land, this life, it's mine now. I can't imagine leaving it." Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem stacked against you." "What about you?" Tabitha asked. "You've been wandering since the war, no desire to settle somewhere." A shadow passed over Isaac's face. "I thought about it, came close once or twice. But something always pulled me back to the road." "Restlessness, maybe," Isaac agreed. "Or maybe I just haven't found the right place yet." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. Tabitha looked away first, suddenly conscious of how intimate their conversation had become. "It's getting late," she said, rising from the table. Thank you again for your help today." Isaac stood as well, his height making the kitchen seem smaller. "Good night, Mrs. Dawson." "Tabitha," she corrected impulsively. "After all this time, you might as well use my name." His smile was warm. "Good night, Tabitha." As the days passed, Isaac became a fixture at the farm. He never mentioned leaving for Sacramento again, and Tabitha never asked. They fell into a comfortable routine, working side by side during the day, sharing meals and conversation in the evenings. Despite his continued residence in the barn, Tabitha knew the town gossip was probably reaching fever pitch, but she found it increasingly difficult to care. November brought the first frost, painting the farm in silver and white. Tabitha awoke one morning to find Isaac already in the barn, tending to the animals. "Storm coming," he said by way of greeting, nodding toward the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "We should secure everything before it hits." They worked together throughout the morning, bringing in firewood, checking the roof repairs, ensuring the animals had adequate shelter. By midday, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of rain. "That should do it," Isaac said as they finished reinforcing the chicken coop. "We might be in for a long night." The storm hit with unexpected ferocity just after sunset. Rain lashed against the windows, and wind howled through the trees surrounding the property. Tabitha paced the kitchen, worrying about Isaac in the barn. A particularly violent gust rattled the house, and Tabitha made her decision. Donning her coat and grabbing a lantern, she fought her way through the tempest to the barn. She found Isaac checking on the horses, his clothes already damp from a leak in the barn roof. "You shouldn't be out in this," he shouted over the storm. "Neither should you," Tabitha replied. "Come to the house. This is ridiculous." Isaac hesitated, clearly thinking of her reputation. "Isaac Blackburn, I will not have you catching your death in my barn," Tabitha insisted. "What the town thinks is of no consequence during a storm like this." Finally, he nodded, securing the barn door behind them before following Tabitha through the raging storm to the relative safety of the house. Inside, Tabitha stoked the fire while Isaac removed his wet coat and boots. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly. This man in her home, warming himself by her fire, as if he belonged there. "I'll make up the spare room," she said, more to distract herself from these thoughts than anything else. "Thank you," Isaac replied simply. Later, with the storm still raging outside, they sat before the fire, each lost in their own thoughts. Tabitha found herself stealing glances at Isaac's profile, illuminated by the dancing flames. "You should know," he said suddenly. "I've been offered work in town, at the livery stable." Tabitha felt a strange mixture of emotions at his words. "You're staying in Knights Ferry then?" "Thinking about it," Isaac admitted. "Been on the move a long time. Maybe it's time to put down some roots." "What about Sacramento?" Isaac looked at her then, his blue eyes serious in the firelight. "Some destinations turn out to be less important than the places you find along the way." Tabitha's heart quickened at his words, at the implication behind them. "The town won't make it easy for you, associating with me." "The town's opinion means very little to me," Isaac replied. "Always has." "A dangerous quality in a small community," Tabitha observed, though she couldn't help but smile. "I've faced worse dangers than wagging tongues," Isaac said, his voice soft. "Some things are worth the risk." The intensity of his gaze made Tabitha look away, her cheeks warming. "It's late. We should both get some rest." Isaac nodded, rising from his chair. "Good night, Tabitha." "Good night, Isaac." Sleep eluded Tabitha that night, her thoughts consumed by the man sleeping down the hall. In the 3 months since James's death, she had been focused solely on survival, keeping the farm, proving her independence. She hadn't allowed herself to think of companionship or, God forbid, love. Yet here was Isaac, steady and kind, making her question her solitary path forward. Morning brought clearing skies and a decision. After breakfast, Tabitha broached the subject that had kept her awake. "If you're serious about staying in Knights Ferry, you could stay here," she offered, trying to keep her voice casual. "Not in the barn, I mean. The farm needs more than one person to run properly, and I could use a partner." Isaac regarded her thoughtfully. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Tabitha?" "Yes," she said quickly, then faltered. "That is, primarily. Because I should be clear about my intentions," Isaac continued, his voice low. "I don't want to be just your hired hand." Tabitha's breath caught. "What do you want to be?" "Whatever you'll allow," he answered honestly. "Friend, partner, more if you're willing. But I won't pressure you or rush you. I know you're still grieving." "I loved James," Tabitha said, needing him to understand. "I always will." "As it should be," Isaac agreed. "I'd never ask you to forget him or stop loving him." Tabitha studied his face, the sincerity in his eyes. "The town will talk more than ever." "Let them talk," Isaac said, echoing her own defiant words. A slow smile spread across Tabitha's face. "Then yes, I'd like you to stay, as my partner in the farm and whatever else may come." Isaac's answering smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "Yes, madam." True to Tabitha's prediction, the town's reaction to Isaac's permanent residence at the Dawson farm was swift and judgmental. When they rode into Knights Ferry together the following week, whispers followed them through the streets. "At the general store, Mrs. Holbrook made her disapproval abundantly clear. "Mrs. Dawson, we're all quite concerned about your living arrangements. It's most improper for a widow to have a male boarder, especially one of questionable background." "Mr. Blackburn is my business partner," Tabitha replied evenly. "And his background is no more questionable than anyone else's in this town." "A partnership?" Mrs. Holbrook raised her eyebrows skeptically. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Isaac, who had been selecting tools nearby, approached the women with deliberate calm. "Mrs. Holbrook, isn't it? I've heard a great deal about you." The older woman seemed taken aback by his direct address. Yes, Mr. Blackburn." "Then you should know that Mrs. Dawson deserves your respect, not your gossip," Isaac said, his voice pleasant but firm. "She's worked harder than most men I know to keep her farm running after her husband's passing." "Well, I never," Mrs. Holbrook began indignantly. "If you're truly concerned about propriety," Isaac continued, "you might consider offering friendship instead of judgment. Tabitha has lost her husband, not her dignity or her right to determine her own path." The store had fallen silent, everyone listening to the exchange. Mrs. Holbrook's face flushed with embarrassment or anger, perhaps both. "Come, Tabitha," Isaac said, offering his arm. "I believe we've completed our purchases." Outside, Tabitha couldn't contain her laughter. "I think you've just made an enemy for life." "Wouldn't be the first time," Isaac replied with a shrug. "Besides, someone needed to say it." Their relationship evolved slowly over the following weeks. Isaac continued to sleep in the spare room, respecting both Tabitha's grief and her reputation, damaged as it already was. They worked side by side during the days, their partnership bringing new life to the struggling farm. In the evenings, they would read by the fire or simply talk, learning each other's histories and hopes. December arrived with a heavy snowfall that blanketed Knights Ferry in white. Tabitha awoke one morning to find Isaac already outside, clearing a path to the barn. She watched him through the window, his breath visible in the cold air, his movements strong and sure. A warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. In the months since James's death, she had never imagined feeling this way again, this quickening of her pulse, this flutter of anticipation when Isaac entered a room. Was it a betrayal of James's memory to feel such things? Or was it, perhaps, a testament to the love they had shared that she could recognize love again when it presented itself? That evening, as snow continued to fall outside, Tabitha and Isaac sat closer than usual before the fire. The festive season was approaching, and despite her initial reluctance, Tabitha had allowed Isaac to bring in a small pine tree for the corner of the sitting room. Christmas was James's favorite holiday, she confessed as they strung popcorn for the tree. I wasn't sure I could face it without him. And now, Isaac asked gently, now I think he would want me to celebrate, Tabitha said, to find joy where I can. Isaac's hand found hers, warm and calloused from work. You're an extraordinary woman, Tabitha Dawson. Hardly extraordinary, she demurred. Just stubborn, remember. Stubborn, yes, Isaac agreed with a smile, but also brave, intelligent, and stronger than anyone I've ever known. Tabitha met his gaze, her heart pounding. Isaac, I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. I wanted you to know that. You don't need to say anything in return. I just thought you should know where I stand. Tabitha's throat tightened with emotion. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of loving you, I think that's already happening despite my best efforts, but of losing again, of the pain that comes after. Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. Love is always a risk, but a life without it seems a poor alternative. Yes, Tabitha whispered, moving closer to him. A poor alternative indeed. Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent, more needful. When they finally pulled apart, Tabitha rested her forehead against Isaac's, breathless. Stay with me tonight, she whispered. Not in the spare room. Isaac's arms tightened around her. Are you certain? More certain than I've been about anything in a very long time. That night, in the shelter of each other's arms, Tabitha felt the last of her grief begin to loosen its hold on her heart. Not disappearing, never that, but making room for something new, something equally precious. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling panorama of white. Tabitha woke to find Isaac watching her, his expression tender. Merry Christmas, he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Merry Christmas, she replied, leaning into his touch. They exchanged simple gifts, a new scarf she had knitted for him in secret, a delicately carved wooden box he had made for her. But the true gift, Tabitha knew, was the second chance they had found in each other. After a special breakfast, they bundled up against the cold and headed into town for the Christmas service. Tabitha knew they would face scrutiny, but she was no longer willing to hide or apologize for the happiness she had found. The small church was crowded when they arrived, festooned with holly and candles for the occasion. Conversation stuttered to a halt as Tabitha and Isaac entered, her hand resting comfortably in the crook of his arm. Reverend Phillips greeted them warmly enough, though his eyes held questions. Tabitha guided Isaac to a pew near the back, conscious of the stares and whispers surrounding them. Scandalous, she heard Mrs. Harrison murmur to her companion, not even waiting a proper mourning period before taking up with another man. And living in sin by all accounts, another voice added. Poor James must be turning in his grave. Tabitha stiffened, the words striking deeper than she wanted to admit. Isaac squeezed her hand reassuringly. Don't let them dim your light, he whispered. They don't know what's in your heart. The service proceeded, the familiar Christmas hymns and readings providing a measure of comfort. But when it ended and the congregation began to disperse, Mrs. Holbrook approached, several other town matrons in her wake. Mrs. Dawson, she began, her voice carrying just enough to ensure others would hear. While we appreciate your attendance today, I feel it's my Christian duty to express the town's concern about your living arrangements. A decent widow would not be flaunting her relationship with another man so soon after her husband's passing, especially without the sanctity of marriage. Tabitha felt her cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. Before she could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. "I believe that's between Mrs. Dawson and God, Margaret." Sheriff Morgan stepped forward, his expression stern. "This is a house of worship, not a courthouse." "But the impropriety," Mrs. Holbrook began. "I see nothing improper about two adults attending church together," the sheriff interrupted. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to wish Mrs. Dawson and Mr. Blackburn a Merry Christmas." The sheriff's unexpected support gave Tabitha courage. As they exchanged pleasantries with him, other townspeople approached Mr. Jenkins and his wife, young Dr. Thompson and his family, the blacksmith and his daughters. Not everyone, certainly, but enough to make it clear that Knights Ferry was not of one mind regarding Tabitha's choices. As they prepared to leave, however, a final confrontation awaited them. Albert Wilson, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the area who had been trying to buy Tabitha's land since James's death, blocked their path. "Quite the cozy arrangement you've got, Mrs. Dawson," he said, his voice slick with false concern. "But farming's a hard life, especially with the mortgage coming due soon. My offer to buy your property still stands. Might be easier than trying to make a go of it, even with your helper." Isaac tensed beside her, but Tabitha placed a calming hand on his arm. "Mr. Wilson," she said clearly, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I've told you before that the farm is not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone." "Be reasonable, woman," Wilson said, dropping his pretense of concern. "You can't hope to keep that place running. It was failing even when your husband was alive." A hush fell over the church steps as people strained to hear the exchange. Tabitha felt a flash of anger at Wilson's dismissal of James's hard work. "Our farm is doing quite well, actually," she replied evenly. "And it will continue to do so because I am not alone in running it anymore." Wilson's gaze flicked to Isaac, contempt evident in his expression. "Yes, we've all heard about your partnership with this drifter. Tell me, Blackburn, how long before you move on, leaving her high and dry?" "Men like you don't stay put." Isaac stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "You're mistaken, Wilson. I'm not going anywhere." "So you say now," Wilson scoffed. "But when things get tough—" "The widow was shamed for being alone," Isaac interrupted, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. He moved to stand beside Tabitha, his hand finding hers in a public declaration of unity. "But she's not alone anymore." The simplicity and conviction of his statement silenced Wilson more effectively than any argument could have. Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes as Isaac continued. "Mrs. Dawson has shown more courage and determination than anyone I've ever met. She deserves your respect, not your judgment or your attempts to take advantage of her situation." Isaac's gaze swept the crowd. "And as for my intentions, I intend to marry her if she'll have me." Tabitha's heart seemed to stop, then race forward at his unexpected declaration. She turned to him in surprise. "This wasn't how I planned to ask," Isaac said softly for her ears alone, "but I mean every word." Wilson sputtered indignantly, but his protests were drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd and, surprisingly, a smattering of applause led by Dr. Thompson. "Well, I never," Mrs. Holbrook exclaimed, though she seemed more flustered than truly outraged. Sheriff Morgan stepped forward again, a smile tugging at his mustache. "Seems to me this calls for congratulations, not condemnation. What say you, Mrs. Dawson? Have you got yourself an engagement to announce?" All eyes turned to Tabitha, waiting for her response. She looked up at Isaac, at the love and promise in his eyes, and found her answer. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I do. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. While some in Knights Ferry continued to disapprove of Tabitha and Isaac's relationship, their engagement announcement had shifted the town's perception. The fact that Isaac had declared his intentions so publicly, combined with Sheriff Morgan's tacit approval, lent legitimacy to their union in the eyes of many. Reverend Phillips agreed to perform the ceremony in February, allowing for a respectable engagement period and time for the necessary preparations. In the meantime, Isaac moved back to sleeping in the barn, a gesture toward propriety that amused Tabitha even as she missed his presence in the house at night. "It's only for a few weeks," he reminded her one evening as they sat planning their modest wedding. "And it gives the gossips one less thing to talk about." "As if they need encouragement," Tabitha replied with a laugh. "Mrs. Holbrook cornered me after church on Sunday to ask if our hasty union was due to an impending blessed event." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "And what did you tell her?" "That the only blessed event I'm expecting is becoming your wife," Tabitha said, her cheeks warming at the memory, though she didn't seem entirely convinced. "Let her wonder," Isaac said, taking Tabitha's hand. "What matters is that we know the truth of our feelings." The truth was that Tabitha had never expected to find love again, especially not so soon after losing James. Yet here it was, different from what she had shared with her first husband, but no less real, no less profound. Isaac understood her grief, her determination to honor James's memory by keeping the farm thriving. He never asked her to forget or diminish what she had lost, only to make room in her heart for something new. January brought heavy rains that turned the roads to mud and kept them largely confined to the farm. They used the time to plan for spring planting and to make improvements to the house. Isaac proved to be skilled at carpentry, repairing the sagging porch and building new shelves in the kitchen. "You're nesting," Tabitha teased him one afternoon as he measured for new curtains in the sitting room. "Just making our home worthy of you," he replied, pulling her into his arms for a quick kiss. "Our home." The words filled Tabitha with a deep contentment. The farm that had once been her and James's dream had evolved into something different but equally precious her and Isaac's future. February arrived with milder weather and wedding preparations in earnest. Tabitha chose a simple blue dress rather than traditional white, feeling it more appropriate for a widow's second marriage. Isaac ordered a new suit from Sacramento, delivered on the stagecoach just days before the ceremony. The night before their wedding, Tabitha found herself unable to sleep, her mind filled with memories and anticipation. She slipped out of bed and made her way to James's grave on the small hill overlooking the farm. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Tabitha knelt beside the simple headstone, her fingers tracing the carved letters of her first husband's name. "I'm getting married tomorrow," she said softly. "I think you would like Isaac. He's a good man, strong and kind like you were. He's helped me keep the farm going, our dream." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'll always love you, James, always. But I've found room in my heart for him too. I hope you understand." A gentle breeze stirred the grass around the grave, and Tabitha felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whether it was a sign or simply her own heart finding closure, she couldn't say, but she rose from beside the grave with a lighter spirit. As she turned to walk back to the house, she saw a figure waiting at the bottom of the hill, Isaac, silhouetted against the starlit sky. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said as she approached. "I saw you from the barn and wanted to make sure you were all right." "I am," Tabitha assured him, taking his hand. "I was just saying goodbye in a way, not to James's memory but to the grief that's been my constant companion." Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Tabitha smiled, her heart full. more than ready. Their wedding day dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself approved of their union. The ceremony was small, held in the church in Knights Ferry, with only a handful of guests in attendance, those who had shown support and kindness during the difficult months of Tabitha's widowhood. Reverend Phillips performed the service with genuine warmth, his earlier reservations apparently set aside. When Isaac and Tabitha exchanged their vows, his voice strong and hers clear, despite the emotion of the moment, there wasn't a dry eye in the small congregation. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Isaac's kiss was tender and promising, a seal on their commitment that made Tabitha's heart soar. As they turned to face their small gathering of friends, she felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. The celebration afterward was held at their farm, the same place where Tabitha had once thought she would spend her life alone. Now it buzzed with laughter and conversation as neighbors and friends shared food and drink in honor of the new union. Even Mrs. Holbrook attended, her attitude noticeably softened. "You make a handsome couple," she admitted to Tabitha as the afternoon waned. "Perhaps I was hasty in my judgment." "Thank you, Mrs. Holbrook," Tabitha replied graciously. "Your presence today means a great deal to us both." As the last guests departed and twilight settled over the farm, Isaac and Tabitha stood on their porch, his arm around her waist, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. "Happy Mrs. Blackburn?" Isaac asked, the new name still sounding wonderful to Tabitha's ears. "Very," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "And you, Mr. Blackburn, any regrets about settling down with a stubborn widow?" "Not a single one," Isaac replied, turning her to face him. "You are the home I've been searching for since the war ended. Everything I want is right here." That night, as they lay together in what was now their bedroom, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of grief to the heights of new love, from isolation to partnership, from judgment to acceptance, each step had been necessary, each challenge overcome together. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "How life rarely goes as planned," Tabitha replied, "and how sometimes the unexpected path leads to something better than we could have imagined." "Wise words from my wise wife," Isaac murmured, pulling her closer. As spring blossomed across the valley, so too did the Blackburn farm flourish under the care of its dedicated owners. Isaac and Tabitha worked side by side, their complementary skills making the land more productive than it had been in years. They planted new apple trees, expanded the vegetable garden, and added to their cattle herd. The town's attitude continued to evolve as well. Those who had been quickest to judge became quieter as they witnessed the genuine partnership and affection between the couple. New friendships formed, particularly with Dr. Thompson and his wife, who often joined them for Sunday dinners. In May, Tabitha received a letter that changed their lives once again. Her younger sister Teresa was widowed unexpectedly and asked if she might come west with her young son, seeking a fresh start away from painful memories. "Of course she must come," Isaac said without hesitation when Tabitha shared the news. "Family is family." Teresa and 5-year-old Thomas arrived in June, bringing new energy to the farmhouse. The boy, initially shy and grieving his father, quickly took to Isaac, following him around the farm with wide-eyed fascination. "You're good with him," Tabitha observed one evening as Isaac patiently taught Thomas how to whittle a simple whistle from a willow branch. "He's a good boy," Isaac replied, ruffling the child's hair. "Smart, too." Watching them together stirred something in Tabitha, a longing she had set aside years ago when children hadn't come during her marriage to James. Now, seeing Isaac's natural ease with Thomas, she allowed herself to hope again. That night, after Teresa and Thomas had retired to their room, Tabitha broached the subject that had been on her mind. "You ever think about having children of our own?" she asked as they prepared for bed. Isaac paused, his expression thoughtful. "I've thought about it," he admitted. "Especially since Thomas arrived, but I didn't want to pressure you knowing you and James didn't have children," Tabitha finished for him. "Yes, after a few years of trying, we had accepted it might not happen for us." She took a deep breath. "But I'm not opposed to trying again if you want to." Isaac crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her in his arms. "I would be honored to raise a family with you, Tabitha Blackburn, but even if it's just the 2 of us, I'll consider myself the luckiest man alive." Their life settled into a pleasant rhythm with Teresa and Thomas as part of their household. Teresa proved to be an excellent cook and seamstress, skills that complemented Tabitha's more practical farm knowledge. The 2 sisters, separated for many years, rediscovered their bond through shared work and memories. By the autumn of 1873, a year after Isaac had first appeared in Tabitha's life, the farm was thriving as never before. The mortgage had been paid off with the profits from their cattle sales, and they were considering purchasing additional land that adjoined their property. And Tabitha had news that filled her with both excitement and trepidation. After missing her monthly courses for 2 months, she had visited Dr. Thompson, who confirmed her suspicions. She chose a quiet evening to share the news with Isaac, after Teresa had taken Thomas into town for supplies. "I have something to tell you," she began as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset that had become their daily ritual. Isaac turned to her, concern in his eyes at her serious tone. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong," Tabitha assured him, taking his hand. "Just unexpected. Dr. Thompson says we're going to have a baby in the spring." Isaac's expression transformed from concern to wonder in an instant. "A baby?" "You're certain?" Tabitha nodded, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Quite certain. Dr. Thompson says everything looks well." With a whoop of joy that startled the chickens in the nearby yard, Isaac lifted Tabitha from her chair, spinning her around before setting her gently back on her feet. "Careful," she laughed, steadying herself against his chest. "I'm in a delicate condition, remember." "I'll be more careful than you can imagine," Isaac promised, his hand moving reverently to rest on her still flat stomach. "You and this little one are my whole world." The news of Tabitha's pregnancy spread quickly through Knights Ferry, met with genuine congratulations from most quarters. Even Mrs. Holbrook brought over a handmade baby blanket, her earlier disapproval apparently forgotten in the face of new life. "Every baby needs something made with love," she said as she presented the gift to Tabitha. "I'm pleased to see you so happy, my dear. You've been through so much." "Thank you, Mrs. Holbrook," Tabitha replied, touched by the gesture. "That means a great deal to me." Winter came early that year, bringing heavy snows in November that isolated the farm for days at a time. Isaac was more protective than ever, insisting on handling the outdoor chores alone, while Tabitha, Teresa, and Thomas kept the house warm and busy with preparations for both Christmas and the coming baby. On Christmas Eve, as they sat around the fire with Teresa and Thomas, Tabitha felt a profound sense of gratitude for the family that had formed around her, so different from what she had imagined but precious beyond measure. "I have a gift for you," Isaac said, handing her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "I couldn't wait until morning." Tabitha unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden cradle, intricately carved with flowers and vines. "Isaac, it's beautiful." "I've been working on it in the barn when you weren't looking," he admitted. "There's a matching rocking chair too, but it's not quite finished." "It's perfect," Tabitha whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Our baby will love it." "And I have a surprise for both of you," Teresa announced, her eyes bright with excitement. "Dr. Thompson has offered to train me as a midwife. I've already begun studying with him. By the time the baby comes, I'll be able to assist with the birth." "Teresa, that's wonderful news," Tabitha exclaimed, embracing her sister. "It feels good to have a purpose again," Teresa admitted. "After losing Robert, I wasn't sure I would ever find my way, but being here with all of you has helped me see that life goes on." Thomas, who had been patiently waiting his turn to share, tugged at Isaac's sleeve. "I have a present too," he announced importantly, presenting a crudely wrapped package. Inside was a small wooden horse, clearly carved with a child's inexpert but loving hands under Isaac's guidance. "For the baby," Thomas explained, "so it can have a horse even before it can ride a real one." Tabitha felt tears well in her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's wonderful, Thomas. The baby will treasure it." Later that night, as she and Isaac lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, Tabitha reflected on how much had changed in a year. From the depths of grief and loneliness, she had found her way to a fuller life than she had ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked, his hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly. "That life is full of surprises," Tabitha replied, turning to face him. "A year ago, I thought I would spend the rest of my days alone, fighting to keep this farm and enduring the town's judgment. Now look at us." "A family," Isaac said simply. "That's what we are." "Yes," Tabitha agreed, placing her hand over his. "A family." The baby, a boy they named James Isaac Blackburn, arrived on a bright April morning in 1874, with Teresa assisting Dr. Thompson during the delivery. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, evident from his first lusty cries. Isaac, who had paced anxiously outside the bedroom door throughout Tabitha's labor, wept unashamedly when Dr. Thompson placed his son in his arms. "He's perfect," Isaac whispered, gazing down at the tiny face. "Thank you, Tabitha. Thank you for this gift." "Our gift," Tabitha corrected tiredly from the bed, her face glowing with exhaustion and joy. "To each other." News of James Isaac's birth brought visitors from throughout Knights Ferry, bearing gifts and good wishes. Even Albert Wilson sent a silver rattle with a note of congratulations, a grudging acknowledgment of the Blackburn success where he had predicted failure. As spring blossomed into summer, life at the farm settled into a new rhythm centered around the baby. Tabitha found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she had imagined, while Isaac took to fatherhood with natural ease. "He has your smile," Isaac observed one evening as they sat on the porch, the baby sleeping peacefully in Tabitha's arms. "And your stubbornness too, I think." "Poor child," Tabitha laughed softly. "Though your determination is nothing to scoff at either, Mr. Blackburn." "True enough," Isaac conceded. "Between the two of us, this boy is bound to be strong-willed." Thomas had appointed himself the baby's official protector, proudly helping with simple tasks and entertaining young James with stories and songs. Teresa, meanwhile, continued her training with Dr. Thompson, occasionally assisting with births in the surrounding area. The farm prospered under their care, expanding to include neighboring land when it became available. Isaac proved to have a good head for business, while Tabitha's practical knowledge of farming ensured their crops thrived. They hired 2 young men from town to help with the heavier work, creating a small but efficient operation that became known for its quality produce and livestock. In the evenings, They would gather as a family in the sitting room that had once felt so empty to Tabitha. Now it rang with conversation, laughter, and occasionally baby James's cries. The house that had once been filled with grief had become a home overflowing with love. 5 years passed in this way. Years of growth and change for both the farm and the family. Thomas grew from a shy 5-year-old into a confident 10-year-old with a talent for horses and a quick mind for mathematics. Teresa eventually married Dr. Thompson, moving into town but remaining a constant presence in their lives. And James Isaac was joined by a sister, Elizabeth Teresa, born on a snowy December night in 1876. The family expanded again 2 years later with the arrival of twins, Sarah and Samuel, completing their brood and filling the farmhouse with the happy chaos of children. Knights Ferry changed too, growing with the expansion of the railroad and the influx of new settlers. The judgmental whispers that had once followed Tabitha through town were long forgotten, replaced by respect for the prosperous Blackburn family and their contributions to the community. On a warm summer evening in 1879, Tabitha and Isaac stood on the hill overlooking their farm, much as they had on their wedding day years before. The fields below were lush with crops, the barn and outbuildings freshly painted, the house expanded to accommodate their growing family. "Did you ever imagine this?" Isaac asked, his arm around Tabitha's waist. "When you were determined to stay here alone after James died?" Tabitha leaned against his shoulder, watching their children playing in the yard below. 7-year-old James was teaching his 5-year-old sister how to catch fireflies, while the 3-year-old twins toddled after them, supervised by Thomas, now 15 and tall as his uncle. "Never," she admitted. "I was just trying to survive then, to keep what James and I had built. I couldn't see beyond the next day, the next season." And now, Tabitha turned to face her husband, studying the face that had become so dear to her. The years had added lines around his eyes and touches of gray at his temples, but his smile still made her heart quicken. "Now I see a future I never dared to dream of," she replied. "Because of you, because you stood beside me when everyone else thought I should give up." Isaac's eyes softened with memory. "The widow was shamed for being alone," he quoted softly, "but she's not alone anymore." "And never will be again," Tabitha promised, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Below them, little Elizabeth called out, "Mama! Papa! Come see the fireflies." Hand in hand, Tabitha and Isaac made their way down the hill to join their family, their steps sure on the path they had forged together. From the depths of grief, Tabitha had found her way to joy. From judgment and shame, she had risen to respect and contentment. From loneliness, she had built a family bound by love and strengthened by shared struggles. And in the strong, steady man who walked beside her, she had found not just a husband and partner, but a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope endures. That love, in its many forms, can heal the deepest wounds. That sometimes, the end of one story is merely the beginning of another, even more beautiful one, as the sun set over Knights Ferry, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The Blackburn family gathered on their porch, together and complete. The widow who had once been shamed for her solitude was surrounded by love. Her life a testament to the power of courage, determination, and the unexpected gifts that come to those brave enough to embrace them.